Shalom Aleichem. Today is Wednesday. It's Yud Zayin Tov, Adar Sheni. It's the first day of this Machzor of Limud Rambam. It's almost 40 years since we started, so I guess it's 43 Machzorim, I figure. Right? Because last year was 42. It was an even number because we finished Perek Echad Layim 14 times and Shloisha Pachim Layim 42 times. So we must have just finished the 33rd cycle and began the 44th cycle. Because the Limud Rambam is a little bit less than a year, and in an Ibayar you gain 40 days. So in over these 40 years, it's added up to 3 extra cycles over the 40 years. And I remember the first Sichos that Rabbi spoke, mit 40 Jahr zurück, Ozlei Eivesh Ba'habiti El Kol Mitzvah. That the Rambam was celebrating the fact that when you know Kol HaTeira Kula, Loi Eivesh, and you have to teach it to somebody else. The Rebbe gave us an incredible matana, and seeing Rambam is an incredible simcha, and the Eivesh has to give us all seichel, that we should celebrate, we should learn Rambam and enjoy Rambam. Teira Dachma Magishmak, Adai Te Denafshe. And we should be zeichet by Limud Kol HaTeira Kula, together with all the other Yidden in the world, to be zeichet to this Gals of Melech HaMashiach. Now this year is chus for my dear friend Chaim, Meir Chaim Ben Chayetzira, who has a difficult day today. So Leibishtem Benshon, so Duragim Batzlacha, Besimcha Batzlacha. And we should share only Besuras Tevis, Lariches Yamim Veshanim Tevis. Now, I'm learning Yerav Nissen Mamer. Why? Because there are no current Maimorim, and this is the decision I made. We're going to learn for the foreseeable future the Maimorim of Tafshin Lamed Dalet for a while. And then I'm starting a month ahead, so 3 weeks ahead. So we'll be ahead and ahead of ahead as time moves on, and then with the spare time we'll do Mitzvah Hashem from Tafshin Tezvav, I believe, which is where we're holding, or possibly Tezayin, depending on what there is for us to be mashlim. So, yesterday I learned the Mamer Bechol Day V'Deir Chayev Adam Liris Es Atzmi Kilu Yotzam Mitzrayim with the Rebbe Sayirav. This is Tafshin Lamed Dalet. Today I learned the Mamer, which the Rebbe said on Achen Shal Pesach. V'Hecher V'Deshem Es L'Shen Yam Mitzrayim V'Hikavu, and they're going to be split to Shiva and Acholim and the whole thing. These two Maimorim are clearly a hemshech. They're clearly a hemshech. And the way it looks right now is that this Mamer is going to be one class, but the next Mamer will be Bli Neder Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, 2 classes. That's the way I envisage it. That's how I'm planning it. No promises, but that's how I see it. Although both Maimorim are 6 pages long, and this Mamer is actually a bit longer, but I intend on teaching this in 1 class and that Mamer in 2. I guess the primary reason is because that Mamer leaves much more to innuendo, much more to the Rebbe is not explaining fully what he's trying to say, and there's a lot more thinking that you need to do. So I'm probably going to structure that Mamer not in the order of the Mamer. This Mamer we're going to learn straight through from the beginning to the end. We're going to learn it straight. The next Mamer I'm probably going to teach it to you Shalei Ala Seder, in the kind of way that we're going to begin the next Mamer in a way that segues from this. First thing is, this is Tafshin Lamed Dalet 1974. The Rebbe turns 72 years old and begins to say Kapitel Ayin Gimel. And the niggin of that year, I remember this as a child, was Mili Vashamayim Bimchal Echfatzli Ba'aretz Kolosh Eri Levavi Tzur Levavi Vechelki Elikim Lielim. Mili Bashamayim Bimchal Echfatzli Ba'aretz Kolosh Eri Levavi Tzur Levavi Kolosh Eri Levavi Tzur Levavi Vechelki Elikim Lielim. Mili Bashamayim. It was a niggin that started in the middle. There's no beginning. It started right in the middle of a niggin. Now, how old was I in 1974? I was 8. So obviously I was not in the running to composing a niggin. I was not in the running of understanding what was going on, but it was part of my childhood. It was a very rich part of my childhood. We lived in 7-7. That was our reality. That was our world. The Rebbe was everything to us. The first niggin that I remember was Yasisu v'Yismachu. which was Tafshin Lamed Aleph, when I was 5 and a half, 6. And then Bechal Hashem Chasisi and all the other Nagunim that came along with Lion Bays when in 1972 I was 6.5 years old. When I think about it now, I felt like such a big boy. We were bitzalach kinder. But we were very pure and very, very present. Ooh. So I remember these Nagunim well. But of course, if I had been an adult, anybody who was an adult who would have examined Kapit Layin Gimel would have immediately chosen these psukim from which to make the Nagunim. Mili b'shamayim v'imchalei chafasti b'aretz kol she'edi levav etzur levav. By the way, I remember by that Fabrengen, Benzi and Schenker, who lived on our block on Crown Street, came and he sang Va'ani kirvas elakim litev shatev elakim b'shem elakim machsi yisabaka b'lachasecha. What the thing is the last pasuk in the capital. He came yet Aleph Nissen to Fabrengen, and I remember he stood near the Rashag's place and he came and he sang. But I'm sure it's a beautiful niggin. But you couldn't compete with Mili Bash. And he made an original tune, which maybe some people still remember. I remember it because I was young and my brain worked. But this niggin won out. Why? Why? Because that's what it won out. That's what the Rebbe wanted. But Bepashtas it won out because it speaks about the famous idea that we have in the Alter Rebbe of Mili Bashamayim V'imchalei chavatzti b'yoretz. So the two Maimorim of Pesach and Achan Shel Pesach have Aleph Nissen, which speaks about the beginning of Pesach, and Achan Shel Pesach, which speaks about Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Kriyas Yamsuf and Mashiach. Both are going to revolve around this pasuk. In both Maimorim, a very important part of the Maimid is going to be the discussion on the psukim Mili b'shamayim v'imchalei chafasti b'aretz kol she'edi levav etzur levav echelka lekim li'elam. And in both cases, the Rebbe is going to say the psukim backwards. First, he's going to bring the pasuk, which is Negein Avodah, Kol She'ed Levav Yitzur Levav Echad L'Kim Li'elam, and then he's going to say, and before that is the pasuk Mili B'Shamayim V'Chalei Chavatzti B'Aretz. Now, of course, it's the last Hayom Yom. It's the Hayom Yom of Yitches Kislev, Erev Rosh Hashanah L'Dach. And the Alter Rebbe, when he was in Tzemach Tzedek in Derech Mitzvah and Sheirish Mitzvah Tefillah, Tzemach Tzedek writes, Kach Shamaynu Mepi Azmur Zal. When the Alter Rebbe would go into Advekas, he would say, Mili Bashamayim, V'imchalei chafati ba'aretz, ich will sehr gonist, ich will nicht dein Ganeden, ich will nicht Elam Abeh v'chulu, ich will mir nicht das dich allein. That the Alter Rebbe was not inspired from Geloyim, not the Geloyim from Ganeden, and not even the Geloyim of Elam Abeh, as much as he called Elam Abeh. Geloyim, he wanted dich allein, the Eibishter himself. And both Maimorim are going to be built around this foundational idea of dich alein, having a relationship with the Eibishter himself. What is the difference between the Maimorim? The first Maimor is going to speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the second Maimor is going to speak about Kriyas Yamsuf. The first Maimor is going to speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim, as you'll see inside, that it happened when we left Egypt. It happens once a year when we make a Seder. It happens every day when we have a Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's even going to happen like Yossi Lovi. When the Yossi Lovi, there's going to be even greater Giluim than Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the flies. Still, we're going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the next Maimor is going to speak the same idea as it applies to the splitting of the sea, Kriyas Yamsuf. And when it comes to Kriyas Yamsuf, he's going to say the same thing, that there's a Kriyas Yamsuf that happened the first time. There's the Kriyas Yamsuf which happens every year. There's the Kriyas Yamsuf which happens every day, although that Maimor is very vague about these details. And there's the Kriyas Yamsuf which is going to happen like Yossi Lovi, which is called B'Kiyas HaNohar. And he's going to say also, even when it comes to Kriyas Yamsuf, although B'Kiyas HaNohar is higher than Kriyas Yamsuf, just like when Mashiach comes and the Gula Amitas Vashlema is going to be higher than Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're going to still remember Yetzias Mitzrayim because of the Maila Veskafia. The same is also when Mashiach comes and there's the B'Kiyas HaNohar, which is much higher than the Kriyas Hayam. We're going to still mention the Kriyas Yam as a tafel, as a secondary idea because of the Maila Veskafia. That's what these two Maimorim are going to be about. So what is the difference between Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is what our Maimor is about, and Kriyas Yamsuf, which is what the next Maimor is about? So the answer is going to be made very clear in the next Maimor, that Yetzias Mitzrayim is achonas hakeli, preparing the world for the separation, the breaking of the barrier between Alyenim and Tachtenim. And Kriyas Yamsov is Achonas HaNeshama, is preparing the Oir. And the Rebbe brings a Lashon, Achonas HaKeli and Achonas HaEir. The Exodus, the event of Hashem taking us out of Mitzrayim, is preparing the world for Matan Torah. And the splitting of the sea and revealing Alma Deskasi and Alma Desgalia till the highest levels, that there's no, all of the screens are opened and there's a Gili of Atmos to the lowest Madregas, is preparing Neshamas Yisrael, that are the Oir. That's what these Memorim are going to be about. So the Memorim are obviously contiguous. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful. And it's very, very connected to Yer Alf Nissen and to the Rebbe's Peirik. And we're going to learn. We're going to start from the beginning and we're going to learn. Hebtan the Rebbe Bechal VaDor in every generation. Chayev Adam Lidas Etzatz, a human being, a Yid, has to view himself. Ki'ilu, as though, who Yatza Mitzrayim, who went out of Mitzrayim. Shenem, as the Pasuk says. Bavur ze'asad Hashem li b'tzeisim Mitzrayim, a person has a chiyuv to remember that because of Matzu, Morer, and Menachem lefanecha, Hashem took him out of Mitzrayim. But in that Peirik, in the Haggadah, Bechal VaDor, we mention V'isanu heitim misham. You have to bring the pasuk. V'isanu. The Gemara says you have to say the pasuk. V'isanu heitim misham. We were taken out of Mitzrayim. Man havi isanu losses lanu es ha'ora that shenish b'lav yisenu that he brought us to bring us into Eretz Yisrael. That's the pasuk that you say in the Haggadah, in that Peirik. V'isanu heitim misham, that you're not allowed to see Yetzias Mitzrayim as a retroactive, as something that happened a long time, retrospective, as something that happened a long time, but it's happening to us, and that's in the Haggadah, and it's one of the most important things that you say in the Haggadah, based on this pasuk, V'isanu heitim misham. This is the Lashon Mishnah, which establishes one of the foundations of the Pesach Seder, right? By the Pesach Seder we have mitzvahs. Obviously, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the most important mitzvah was the Korban Pesach, which is accompanied by matzah and morer. Now today we have no Korban Pesach. The matzah is still midiraisa, the morer is midirabanan, and then of course we have the Dalet Koises, and we have the Hasei b'derachedes, and all the other things. But of course, the foundation of all this is Sipu Yetzias Mitzrayim, is the story of going out of Mitzrayim. And the Mishnah says you have to experience the Exodus as not something which happened to our ancestors, but as something that is happening to us. The simple meaning of this, before you get to Chasidus, before you get to anything deeper, and the halacha is in each generation is an obligation on a person to show about himself. This Lashon Rambam Yotzim Shibud Mitzrayim, as if now we're going out of Shibud Mitzrayim, meaning that it's not a story that happened a long time ago that we're commemorating, but we're re-experiencing Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now the simple pshat is that it goes on Chamish Asar B'Nissen, that once a year we make a Seder. And by that Seder we eat matzah before Zeh B'Shor Shesh Matzah Morim and Nachem Lefanecha, that we have to experience Yetzias Mitzrayim as if it's happening to us. Now of course you know and I know that there's something called Sheish Zechiris that we do on a daily basis. But that's only a zecher, it's a memory. And of course, based on the Mishnah, in the Brachas, which we also say in the Haggadah, Yemecha Yecha Yomim Kel Yemecha Yavi Aleilis, Yetzias Mitzrayim is done by day, and Yetzias Mitzrayim is done by night. But the Yom Tiv of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but it's not just a zecher, but we sit by a Seder, and we do Kolon Yonim Shel Alayla Azeh, Latmiya Tinoikis, and the children should speak, and the whole thing, we got it to Levincha, Keneged Abba Abonim. It's about experiencing Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's once a year. Says the Rebbe, however, which we all know, he adds the words Bechol Yom V'Yim every day. Now the Rambam says Kilu Yatsa Ata B'Shibud Mitzrayim, now. But now means by the Seder, which means now on Pesach. The Alter Rebbe says now every day. So in other words, even though the Chiyuv each day is only a Zecher, and not B'Shor Shematzu Morim and Nachem Lefanecha, the Alter Rebbe says there's a Chiyuv every day to experience Yetzias Mitzrayim fully. He interprets a Chiyuv Lidas Esatzmi Kilu Yotza Mi Mitzrayim. Alter Rebbe explains the obligation to show, to demonstrate, to re-experience. Our Exodus is laid Akbetezva, but it's not just on the 50th day of Nisan, B'Chol Yom V'Yom, it's each day. And of course the Rebbe says, V'zeh Matim and Psak Din HaMishnah. It's aligned with the Psak Din HaMishnah, although you could say that the Mishnah means only a Zeicher, and the Alter Rebbe is saying that you have to have each day the equivalent of a Pesach Seder, which is much more than a Zeicher. That the Mishnah says, Maskiri Yetzias Mitzrayim b'chol yom v'gam b'layla, like Elazar ben Azariah said, Achadarsha ben Zema, like it says in the Pasuk, Man, Tizkes Yem Tzadchem Mitzrayim kol yom mechayecha, so the Mishnah interprets mechayecha yom kol yom mechayecha halav yalelis. That the extra word kel includes that you have to mention Yetzias both by day and by night. So that's what the Gemara, the Mishnah is bringing, that Ben Zema said, Kol Yemecha Yechal Havi Aleilis, and the Chachamim said, Yemecha Yecha Elam Azeh, Kol Yemecha Yecha Lahavi Lemes HaMashiach. The Chachamim held, Yetzias Mitzrayim, you have to mention only by day and not by night. And the Koil is teaching us that after Mashiach comes, we're still going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, of course, the lumdis of this is that night means spiritual darkness. Night means spiritual golus. Why would you focus on Yetzias Mitzrayim when you're in the night? And Ben Zema paskins and agrees with Elazar ben Zadia that even in the deepest darkness of the night, you have to experience Yetzias Mitzrayim. Faket, the Seder is made dafka by night. But the one thing about it is that we paskin like the Chachamim as well. Fa'ad, Kamei Shadash Sham, the Mishnah also says, Kal Yemechayach, Alav Lemeis HaMashiach. That Gambi Yemeis HaMashiach has Gili Yetzias Mitzrayim even after Mashiach comes. When the Gili of Mashiach is going to be so much higher than Yetzias Mitzrayim. That it's going to be bought like a shraga batira, it's going to be like a candle in the daytime. Nevertheless, we're still going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. So although we paskin like Elazar ben Azariah and Ben Zema, we're going to do like Chachamim also. How that's going to work out in Lumdis and in Nigla, we'll have to figure out. But this brought in the many Maimorim that we paskin that you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim by day and by night, and we also paskin that we're going to mention it after Mashiach comes. So the Rebbe says, "V'hini mizeh muvim." When you take into account the Mishnah and the Rambam and both shittas of the Mishnah and the Alter Rebbe, when you put all of those things together, the Mishnah, the Rambam, and the Alter Rebbe, muvim, we come away with Sheba Inyan the Yetzias Mitzrayim Yeshnam Kama Dargis. There's 4 steps in Yin of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Aleph, number 1, Yetzias Mitzrayim, the initial event of our Exodus. In the year 2448, Shahaz Haya Inyan the Yetzias Mitzrayim Bepeo Ubepashtas, and the Exodus happened actually and simply, literally, factually, physically. We went out of Mitzrayim. And even then, the Chasidus of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is going to be discussed at length in this Mamer, happened, because it wasn't just a physical Exodus, it also gave us freedom. Nigla Leia Melech Macham Lacham HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'chvei Devyatmu Ga'olam. But the first idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim is historic, it happened. Number 2, the yearly commemoration of Yetzias Mitzrayim by making a Seder, having matzah and Mamer and the Chamisha parts of the Seder of the Haggadah and so forth, which includes specifically 3 things. Number 1, the Leila Seder. Number 2, Gam Erev Chamisha Asar. Ba'akrovas Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach, when the times of the Beis HaMikdash they brought a Korban Pesach. We don't bring a Korban Pesach, we simply read the Siddur and Shama Forum Sfasenu. And number 3, Gam Shives Yom Matzes Techelu, the idea that after the first night we eat matzahs for 7 days, that all 3 of these things, Haskira the Yetzias Mitzrayim, V'hi B'chol Shana. It's the phenomena of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim on a yearly basis. But specifically, within the parameter of this second idea, that every Pesach we re-experience Yetzias Mitzrayim. Erev Pesach is Korban Pesach, and the first night is the Seder, and the 7 days is Shivas Yom Matzos Techelu. But specifically, Yeshnei Hapra Dechayev Adam Lidos as Atzmei. This is where the Mishnah comes along and the Halacha applies. It's an obligation to present oneself. Ki'ilu Yatza Ata Mi Mitzrayim, as if we're not in Mitzrayim now, B'chamisha Asa B'Nissen. That when we see Yetzias Mitzrayim Shasamidus Haggadah, we tell the story, which is the night of Tezvav. Like it says in the Mishnah, and it's brought in the Haggadah, Bavur Zeh, Bavur Zaliyamati, B'Shah, Shesh Matzah Morim, Menachal Fenecha. So, specifically, every Pesach has 3 aspects. Erev Pesach, Pesach, and Shivas Yom Techel Matzis. But of those 3, or the center, the pinnacle of those 3 is the Leila Seder. And I wrote on the margin, B'derech Hefsher, that maybe when the Rebbe divides it up into 3, it's Erev Pesach will be the Matzah of Kedem Chatzos, which you have to watch. The Seder itself, even though we eat before Chatzos, Matzah Dush Onu Eich Lamashum, Nigaleim, which is the Matzah of Achrei Chatzos, and the 7 days of Pesach is the Matzah Reshus, which is higher than Matzah Chayiv. I wrote that on the margin to explain this diuk. The Rebbe insists on saying that this second day of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is the yearly commemoration of Yetzias Mitzrayim is specifically broken up into 3: Erev Pesach, Leila Seder, and the 7 days of Pesach. But then comes V'Hagimel, number 3, which is Ha'inyan the Yetzias Mitzrayim, like the Alter Rebbe says that every day when we say Shema, we don't only mention, but we re-experience Yetzias Mitzrayim. And according to this Alter Rebbe, we re-experience it with the same intensity and with the same presentness, with the same currency. It's happening now, like you do by the Seder. And Ein Zadastir and Mashal Amadim Akosav, although the pasuk seems to say the contrary. Because Bavur Zeh is only Bishosh Yeshbat Pesach Matzu Morim Unachal Ufanecha, which we do not have every day. Says the Rebbe, it doesn't matter, because BiRuchniyus Yeshne Ha'inyan the Matzu Morim. The Pesach Matzu Morim Gam B'Chayim. Spiritually, you can have the Pesach and the Matzu the Morim every day. So the Alter Rebbe's addition is saying it's not just you can mention it every day, but every day you have to have a full inyan of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Those are the first 3 ideas: the historic event of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the yearly full re-experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim by the Seder, and the daily experience, which spiritually also has to be a full experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And finally, V'yesh Eid Inyan Adalad, the final, which is when Mashiach comes. It's above the first thing, which is the Gambi, Mashiach or Mashiach comes. That it says in the pasuk that after Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to show wonders that are going to be, first of all, equal to the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the Pashup shot. Just like when Yidden left Mitzrayim, Hashem made wonders. When Mashiach comes, Hashem is going to make similar wonders. However, it says no. That also love a unit flies afilu be'erech. When Mashiach comes, there's going to be miracles that are going to make the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim seem natural, because they're going to be even greater miracles. So, of course, Kum Tachoy is that Yetzias Mitzrayim, the BS Mashiach that came to take off Miyad Mamish, Amen Ken Yiratzen Mamish, 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 is going to be so much greater than Yetzias Mitzrayim that the miracles of then, or I should say the miracles of now, make the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim look like Teva. Still, even after Mashiach comes, we're going to continue to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's only Shazayi and Shaltafel. And the Rebbe concludes to me, calls them moving. All of this says, Shabi Yetzias Mitzrayim Yeshnem Kama V'Kama Dargis. There's many ideas in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and of course, the point of this Mamer is to address the fundamental question, which is Yetzias Mitzrayim had to do with a nation that was enslaved, and then was freed and made a free people. In other words, physically their masters were taken away from them, and spiritually they were empowered to be free. How are you supposed to do that every day? It's done, it's over with. How are we supposed to each day recreate, reenact the event of losing our masters and becoming free people if we're already free people? And of course the only answer to this question is Chassidus. The only answer to the idea that it's Yetzias Mitzrayim every day, of every year. And the only answer to the question is Yetzias Mitzrayim every day. And the only answer to the question of how after Mashiach comes is still an inyan of Yetzias Mitzrayim, notwithstanding the greater gili of Yemesa Mashiach, is by explaining Yetzias Mitzrayim spiritually, which is what our Maimid is going to do. And it's classic. Everybody knows that we're in limitations, and going on there's limitations in Yetzias Mitzrayim, and those limitations exist also in Kedusha. But the Rebbe says, if that's the pshat in the pasuk, and the flies, that when Mashiach comes, there are going to be miracles that are comparable to the miracles of the initial exodus by Yetzias Mitzrayim. That you made Mitzrayim, Yetzias Mitzrayim, B'pam B'Rashen, glowing out of Egypt the first time, is Aschol as the beginning. V'Nesen is you, and it gives support. V'Koyach, and it gives strength. First of all, but in the Yetzias Mitzrayim Meishu B'Chol Shana. The idea that every year there's a repeat of Yetzias Mitzrayim in a real avoided sense. And even each day, it's not just lip service, it's not just words, but there's a true concept of Exodus. To be sure, that the fact that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim in the year 2448 gives the strength for Yetzias Mitzrayim should be Mesa Mashiach, that the idea of Exodus, when Mashiach comes, is also fueled by the initial Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the proof is the Mikiv and Shagam Yetzias Mitzrayim, since even after Mashiach comes, there's a much higher level of miracle and a much higher level of redemption. We're still going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim, like the Heilig Rebbe Zikarin Zalpi Teira Semes. It's a mandate in Teira, like the Chachamim say, Lahavili Mesa Mashiach, to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Harei Muvim is that this indicates just Zikarin Yetzias Mitzrayim, remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, Yifel Eze Inyan is going to have a certain impact. I feel about my matzav shia oz, even on the condition which is to be after Mashiach comes. After oz yet in the flies, even though there's going to be greater miracles. So you have to remember the Exodus, which happened thousands of years ago, 3,300 and so many years ago, because it's the basis for all concepts of Yetzias Mitzrayim, including Mashiach. And the Rebbe asks a standard question, any move in the question is, everybody knows that the relationship between Yidden and Hashem now is only betrothal. It's a former relationship. And after Mashiach comes, there'll be a real intimate relationship with Yidden and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Especially based on the Zeh which we mentioned a few minutes ago. The Nifloy, she was him the Nifloy Safil Be'erech LaNifloy as the Yetzias Mitzrayim. The miracles of Mashiach are so much greater than the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim that they make him seem like Teva. And finally, particularly how Kabbalah and Chassidus explain how the world is going to look after Mashiach, in explaining the pasuk Mashiach is going to come, and all flesh are going to see the mouth, the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, as Chassidus explains, we're going to see the Dvar Havai. We're going to see not just the creation, but the words of the Eibishter that sustain the worlds. The meaning of this passage is the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be revealed. Is going to be a revelation which the Rebbe Rashab calls famously Malchus Dein Seif. And Atzmei, which the Rebbe Rashab calls famously the Feres Dein Seif. And how is it going to appear to us? We're going to see the Eibishter's words in the creation, which is the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that create the world. Like the famous stories that we know that the Mezritcher Maggid said to the Alter Rebbe 3 days before his Talkus. He asked him what he sees, and the Alter Rebbe said he sees the beams on the ceiling. And the Mezritcher Maggid told him, I don't see the beams anymore, I see the Dvar Hashem, which is Mechayah the beams. Because the biggest tzaddikim 3 days before the Talkus, they no longer see Gashmis. And the Alter Rebbe had the same story with the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, where he also asked him famously, Mendel, what do you see? And Mendel said, the Tzemach Tzedek said, a balkan. And the Alter Rebbe said, I see the Dvar Havai. I said, love, we're all going to see it. We're going to live in the physical world. There's physical creations, but there's going to be V'nigla Pi Havai Adibu. We're going to see the Kerech Apel Benifel. And the Rebbe brings the Mamer Chazal, Oma Malka V'chulu, right? The king can be to uproot a mountain, and in this case, uproot a Helam. And Bashad Van Melech shows in the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, make him a Balabayas over the world. And we're going to see his Balabatishkeit. Not just going to see the world, we're going to see his mastery. And that's the Pshat with Aravai Shamayim Nasu V'ruach Piv quotes from the Eibush to create everything in the world, heaven and earth and everything in between. Using words, we're going to see the Dvar Havai. In other words, that after Mashiach comes, it's going to be very clear and very evident. The power of the procreator in this creation. The heaven and earth and all of its hosts. So first of all, the miracles of Mashiach are so much greater. And second of all, the circumstance of post-Mashiach's coming are going to be so much higher. How does it make sense? We're going to have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. Even then, and the fact that after Mashiach comes, we're going to continue remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, which happened before. Yif'el Kanal is going to somehow have an effect. Eze Inyan is going to have an influence for the better. Ala Maimedu Matzeh Shia Oz, what's going to be after Mashiach comes. So he brings it now was only Edis and Lasad Lavi is Nisuin. He brings that the Neflois of Lasad Lavi are greater than the Neflois of now, and he brings that Lasad Lavi, the whole world is going to reveal the Eibishter. And we're going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the question is, what possible contribution can Yetzias Mitzrayim make to a world where the Eibishter is so revealed? That's the kasha of the Mamer. And really, the kasha goes on all four. I should say the second, the third, the fourth is what happened. The idea that we should remember today and spiritually truly recreate a concept of Golus and a concept of going out of Golus is an odd idea. Bechal Yem Vayem, it's an odd idea, Bechal Deir Vadeir, and it's particularly an odd idea when you're free, as it's going to be Liyasad Lavi. And again, the question is basic, and the answer is also basic. V'yadua nekuda sabir, but the answer is that Mitzrayim spiritually is Mitzrayim Magvul. It means narrowness, it means limitation. It means the idea that we're stuck inside boxes. We're stuck inside parameters. The famous story that Mrs. Swerdlove tells, that they went to Detroit for the Sheikh Chabad convention and they were snowed in. So they called Binyamin, Rabbi Klein, all of Hashem, to tell the Rebbe that they're stuck in Detroit. And Rabbi Klein came back on the phone and he said, the Rebbe will wissen was means stuck. The Rebbe wants to know what stuck means. So Mrs. Popak tried to explain it to him, and Mrs. Popak said, Rabbi Klein said, I think the Rebbe knows what stuck means. A Yid is never stuck. You have a shlichus. But to find yourself in a situation that you did not plan to be in, but the situation presents itself, balkorche sometimes, to figure out why you're there, that's not being stuck. That's Yetzias Mitzrayim. And it's a philosophy, and it's an attitude, and it's a truth. That people always have certain senses of being inhibited, limited. And Yetzias Mitzrayim means breaking those barriers. Obviously, Yetzias Mitzrayim by Pashtus means Hashem takes us out of those barriers. But in Avodah, there's a very significant part of that is where we take ourselves out of those barriers. And that's the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim every day, that through Torah mitzvahs, through Krishma, through Mesilas Nefesh, we take ourselves out of those barriers, and in a bigger way, it's Pesach. It also explains how it could have happened that in a world that belongs to the Eibishter, there should be a literal, actual place called Mitzrayim, which includes Mitzrayim Eresar, the place which is abominable, and Yidden should be trapped in that environment, physically enslaved and spiritually enslaved. If the world is HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Yidden of the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how could Yidden find themselves so stuck? And the answer is because since the Eibishter created on higher levels, Mitzrayim the Gedusha, a theoretical and holy concept of limitation. Because in Kedusha itself, the way the Eibishter created the world, even though it's Kaddish, it's in a state of Mitzrayim Meitzir Gvul. And that is Nishtal Shalu all the way down to the idea of Meitzir Mitzrayim Del Yumazeh. And Yetzias Mitzrayim means breaking not only the barriers of Mitzrayim of Klippa, but even the Mitzrayim of Kedusha. And he says, Meitzir Gvul Arishein, the first example of Mitzrayim is Tzimtzum Arishein. When the Eibishter created the world, he had to hold back his light to create space for creation. So the first Mitzrayim is the conflict between worldliness and godliness, and Mitzrayim means if Hashem wants a world, godliness has to be contained. And of course, Yetzias Mitzrayim means somehow through avodah reversing that. Like the Gemara says, therefore, say that Ishtalshat must make a darkness to create space. And through avodah we bring back first a little bit light and then more light. And then we reverse the Tzimtzum completely. Says the Rebbe, Tzimtzum Arishein is the first model, the first circumstance where the Eibishter Kvayachal is forced, Kvayachal, to create a concept of limitation in himself, or himselfliness, as I like to call, for worlds to exist. Says the Rebbe, Tzimtzum Arishein, this first event of Tzimtzum is Nasin as Mokim sets the stage for subsequent Tzimtzum. The idea, Ha'ishtashlos Mesechem Apasoyes VaDor is a chain reaction of screens and blockages and separations, which ultimately comes down to the lowest of levels of life in Nenarech, that the Eibishter who creates everything even creates worlds that are so incomparably separated from him that there should be Meitzorim or Gvulim Delam Hazagashmi, the narrowness and limitations of the physical world, even as they are in Kedusha. And Elam Hazachumri, not just the physical world, which could be BiRuchniyus, should be spiritual, but the physical world is also crude. In other words, an Elam Hazeh Shabei gave them on Yom Hebech HaKedusha. Gashmiyus could be a Lakus, but Chumri is Hebech HaLakus. And the end of it is, Shemizanasta Mitzrayim keep shooting to the physical land of Mitzrayim, to the physical people of Mitzrayim, and the physical philosophy of Mitzrayim. Kimavur Baruch Bakama Makema, as it's explained so well in Chassidus in so many places. Unakudas ha'inyan bazeh. The basic idea is that Shereishes HaGavuris U'inyan Tzimtzum Arishein, the beginning of creation, is Gavura, is Kvayachal limiting himself and hiding himself and holding himself back to create creations of the world that begins with Tzimtzum Arishein. This Tzimtzum creates subsequent Tzimtzum until the lowest Tzimtzum possible, until you have the Madrega, which is called Dein Lehanyan, the creation of Klippa, which the Eibishter creates, so he doesn't like it. So that presents Mitzrayim not just Begashmius, but also BiRuchniyus. And once you understand that Mitzrayim is not just a physical, geographical phenomenon that happened in a certain chronological time, but it's a metaphysical idea which is constant, now you could speak about Yetzias Mitzrayim not just once in history, but once a year and every day, and even L'havali Mesa Mashiach. So what's supposed to come next in the Mamer? Huh? Next is supposed to come, now that there's Mitzrayim, after Yetzias Mitzrayim. And of course, when you say Yetzias Mitzrayim, bepashtus, it means Hashem has to take us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim the first time, He has to take us out of Mitzrayim now. That step, the Rebbe skips. Explain it how you wish, but that step the Rebbe doesn't go into, how the Eibusher should take us out of Mitzrayim, b'chol yom v'yom. Like the Pasuk says, Kimei tzeischcha me'eret Mitzrayim, and then it flies every day of our life till Mashiach comes. Hashem is empowering our Yetzias Mitzrayim. But what the Rebbe does focus on is our avodah contribution to this. That this idea that every year Eibush takes us out of Mitzrayim depends on the avodah which we do every day, every year, and throughout all of history until Mashiach. So the Rebbe says, Hine, ksiv the Pasuk says, Gam ese'elam nasam belibam, the world is in the heart of man. Like it says in the Mamer of Chasana. Shekol Yisrael every day Avodah say through his avodah b'chol avo b'chol nafsh b'chol meidach he served Hashem with his whole heart, with his whole soul, which just means his body, or b'chol meidach, which means everything he owns, even his gashmius, his mammon, even his mammon is mevatlas hamitzarim agvulim, serving Hashem in a way which breaks limitations within the person, breaks limitations within the world. Sha'in yed b'chol meidach, the idea of serving Hashem not just with your whole heart, which is only in your heart, or with your whole soul, which means your entire body. But also, all of the physical possessions that a person have that are very gashmiistic, and when he gives all of them away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a level of Mesiras Nefesh, he's going out of all limitations. Says the Rebbe, means serving Hashem with all your might, giving Him everything, even the lowest of things you possess, and this is considered for that person beyond any limitations. When a Jew serves Hashem with all of his might, even though the might of a Jew at the best is going to be limited, but because it's the Me'ed Shel Cha, it's Me'ed the Me'ed Shel Maila. Says the Rebbe, Mevatel es hamedidis v'hagbolis shalei. A person breaks his own limitations. And breaking limitations is the union of Yetzias Mitzrayim. This is what says in Tanya Perek Mem Zayin. Bechal, Perek Mem Zayin follows Mem Vov, right? If you know Tanya, that there is the idea of Kamayim aponim leponim king leiv adam al adam, that because Hashem loves us so much, that He abandons the Alyenim, abandons the Malach, He abandons the Srafim, and He's mislabish His Malchus only on us, Neshama is begufim. And He comes down to us, to the lowest places where we are, and He's miyachad us to Him. Makadesh es atzmei, asar al kula almak hekdesh, and we have this very deep relationship with the Eibishter. That relationship is the Eibishter breaking all limitations. That idea that Hashem is singling out a Yid, a Neshama beguf, with all of his foibles and all of his limitations and all of his inexactitudes and all of his chesenis, and makes him his, is a Yetzias Mitzrayim for a person that the Eibishter is doing. And every time a person makes a brach, every time a person does a mitzvah, it doesn't even Yetzias, like it says in Tanya Perek Lamed Aleph at the end, that kol yom b'tshuva, every act of Yiddishkeit is tshuva. Tshuva means lashuv al chayk avi yakunureh, to be one with the Eibishter as the Neshama was before it came into this world. All of these ideas, the idea of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, which separate us from the world and make us Hashem's, and the idea of kol yom b'tshuva, every act of Judaism takes me out of the limitation of my guf and nefesh of hamas mishcha dechivya, and connects me to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is an inyan from Yetzias Mitzrayim. It frees me from the world, and it attaches me to infinity, and it attaching me to infinity, it makes me into the infinity. Who this means, through Avodas Hashem, the Yid approaches Avodas Hashem on a level of Lamai, Lamitam Vadas, above reason. He's not reasonable as Avodas Hashem meaning. Reasonable Avodas Hashem would be Bechal Avacha, or even Bechal Avacha, Bechal Nafshecha, where he holds on to his own self-identity. Bechal Meidecha means, I realize, the only thing which is true is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I recklessly throw myself in His direction, to be connected to Him, my nefesh, my guf, my mammon, my chelki be'elam, and in so doing, I'm breaking out of my limitations. And the person is not at all reckoned with the considerations that the world makes for him, with his neighbors wish to impose upon him. Not only does he not care what the world thinks and what his neighbors think, but he doesn't even care Imachashbein shall gufe v'nefesh b'hamis, what his body and his animal soul care about, was is faseh yishmak, was nit, what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy. And this Yid says, I'm about God. And his avoid is in a way of giving himself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu totally. That is an inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. And in the Mesiras Nefesh is an inyan from Yetzias Mitzrayim. Moreover, not only does he disregard the cheshbenus of the world, not only does he disregard the cheshbenus of his neighbor, not only does he disregard the cheshbenus of his gufa nefesh bahamis, he even disregards the cheshbenus of his godly soul. When a person comes to know that Yiddishkeit is his way of loving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Torah and mitzvahs is an expression of Avas Hashem. He not only serves Hashem, but he serves Hashem for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in serving Hashem on a level where he's not at all thinking about himself, not even BiRuchniyus. He's throwing himself away to the Eibishter completely, and in that throwing himself away to the Eibishter completely, he's doing an Aved Bechal Meidecha, which is Yetzias Mitzrayim. Hine. The idea that the Gemara says, and it's brought in Tanya Perek Gimel, that Ilmale HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ezei, all of Avodas Hashem, the Eibishter helps us by him, since he's recklessly throwing himself away for his relationship with the Eibishter, even his Ruchnius, to serve Hashem on a level of Bechal Meidecha, the Eibishter reciprocally gives him the same madrege that he gets HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eizeh in a level of L'mayla Medida V'Agbala. V'zeh Nes Nes HaKech, it gives him the strength, Durach Subarach and Sachesh, Kafel M'chubel, to break through the barriers of darkness which are doubled and redoubled, which are called the Pasav Yomish Cheshech, tangible darkness, which is how Golos Bechal is and Sevik Mana Golos is especially, V'nas Et Slei Eid, and by this Yid is Lichtigkeit. As it was in Yetzias Mitzrayim the first time when it was physical. Ashagam Kishahayu Adayin B'Mitzrayim while still in Egypt. So the Mitzrayim had V'Yomish Cheshech, and the Yidden had Erev Shveisa. So even in Golos there's Lichtigkeit, the foundation is Lichtigkeit in Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the answer to the question of how you have Yetzias Mitzrayim every day and every year, and really how you even have Yetzias Mitzrayim after Mashiach comes, is predicated on understanding Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus, and Yetzias Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus. It means going out of all limitation. The problem with all of the above is it's very personally redeeming for the Yid, but it's to a very great extent a phenomena of escapism. He's running away from this life, which is of course not the kavanah, especially how we understand it in Chassidus. So therefore the Rabbi continues and he says, however, the mission of every Jew is it's not just he should have light. Should be light in the whole world. In other words, the highest level of Mesiras Nefesh is the Mesiras Nefesh to go away from Mesiras Nefesh, to bring Hashem down into this world first, of Badal, in his 4 cubits, and second, in his entire region, entire neighborhood, in the tower's immediate surroundings, and third, in the entirety of the world. Like it says in the Mishnah, the whole world was created for me. After the Jew experiences the sense of infinity and and practices it to break out of whatever limitations he has, and from the world, from his neighbor, from his guf and nefesh abhamis, and even from his nefesh alekis. This is all new of Mesiras Nefesh, but then he shaves, he settles, he brings it into the world. Who may then, after the Mesiras Nefesh of, so to speak, going out of this world and connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the person, brings light to the whole world. First of all, his portion of the world, that in the whole world, it should begin to shine in a revealed way, the idea of Yesh Balabayis Lebidas, this world has a master. That a person ultimately influences, that godliness which is by itself on high should come to the lowest levels. You should see the madreg of Gil Lakus on a level of Keach Apel Benifel, that the Varavaya is revealed. You don't see the limitations of the world at all. Or you see the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Medaber Mahave, as Hamedida Vagbal, that creates and limits the Medida Vagbal. Says the Rebbe, and when a Yid successfully goes out of his limitations, and then goes out of his going out of limitations, in the direction of shave, to come into the world, to make his Baruch Dili, which is called the higher level of Mesiras Nefesh, which is not to give yourself away to the Eibishter, but liyachtu kutsha b'richot shchente b'tachteinim. And when you do this, you're magavel kus in this world in a way which has no limitations. Limitations, the words are eliminated. The words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So then the Medida v'Agbala Shalamayla. So then it goes out of limitations. What about the fact that the Eibishter created the world in a way of Medida v'Agbala? In other words, even the highest levels, there's a design of limit. When you get past the Medida v'Agbala, which is superficial, you get past the Medida v'Agbala, which says, I can't do it, this is too hard, this is too unacceptable. The limitation which you have when you go out, those limitations is called Medida v'Agbala Atzmis she'eini Medida v'Almitis. It's an absolute limitation, like it says in the Yetzias the Siman Yud, that mitzvahs have Hagbala Atzmis. Chassidus explains how Hagbala Atzmis ain't Hagbala. So B'meila, the Rebbe answered the question fundamentally. How can Yetzias Mitzrayim be spiritual and happen every day and every year and after Mashiach comes, which we'll talk about later some more? And the answer is BiRuchniyus and Yonim and Aveda. It explains on a simple level that along with Krishma every day we mention Vayomer, which is Yetzias Mitzrayim. Krishma by itself is Achdas Hashem, is Mesiras Nefesh, and is connected to Pesach. Why is Krishma connected to Pesach? Because Krishma is Krishma is Mesiras Nefesh, and Aveda Chol Medacha is turned to page 112. The Yetzias Mitzrayim Kanav Gam Pasha is going out of all limitations. It says the Heilig Kenev Eibishor She'emer Hashem Echad Bani Yitzhak Vayechad, which means there's nothing besides for the Eibishter Achach B'Chol Nafshecha. And then he has the kavanah that giving everything has away to the Eibishter, even his life, which is the Madrega B'Chol Nafshecha. Feel it does Nafshech, but in a Mesiras Nefesh. Shemei Seres Atzmei Tum Eibish, and he gives himself away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Rebbe. After that, Kriya Shema Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the nature of Yetzias Mitzrayim is Aidei Yaved the Mesiras Nefesh, through this work of the Mesiras Nefesh, which translates in going out of the limitations of the Guf and the Nefesh HaBahamis. In Avodas Hashem, says the Rebbe, Aved the Mesiras Nefesh Mitzvah Eisei. The practice of Mesiras Nefesh takes a person out of Kol Medina V'Agbala with Yetzias Mitzrayim. And of course, what the Rebbe is saying, BiRuchniyus Yonim, is that Krishma is Mesiras Nefesh and allows us to bring Hashem into the world in a way of Mesiras Nefesh and a way of Bligavo. It's a simple Mamer, as you can see. It's a classic Mamer. It's a typical Mamer. But the question is, Yetzias Mitzrayim happens once a year. How could it even happen once a year? Spiritually speaking, Alachas Kam V'Kam every day. And the answer is through the Aveda B'Chol Meidach. Now we're on page 112, the first full paragraph, and here the next two paragraphs, which is like a page and a half, are the kapitel. It's based on the Yohel Eid and Tilim. If you look at footnote 33, you see him referencing it. The idea that the Rebbe's kapitel is Perek Ayin Gimel, Mili Bashmayim, Imchalech Fasti Yivaz, Kera Shei, Tzolav V'Chalak, Kimli Yelam, the idea of going out of all limitation, which is in Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, of course, all of us know what this is about. This is about the Yetzias Mitzrayim and Avodah. And Yetzias Mitzrayim and Avodah is a combination of Mitzrayim itself, the hardships that we face, the challenges that we face, that require us to dig deep, and because of the challenges and because of the digging deep, we draw a deeper power to go out of limitations to the point of a chol meidacha, and then we do it. And in having Mesiras Nefesh in our avodah life, we're experiencing a breaching of the barrier, a breaching of limitations, which is called Yetzias Mitzrayim, until when Mashiach comes, Mitzrayim is completely limited. There's no Mitzrayim whatsoever. Like the Rebbe said, that the La'asad Lavi, the only Medida V'Agbal that there's going to be is the Medida Agbal of Mitzvahs, which is Agbal Atzmas. Now, the Rebbe will now continue and explain everything he said before, but now he's going to use the language of the Perek, of Kapitel Ayin Gimel, which is the Perek of the Rebbe, Yudalf, this and Tafshan Lamadalat. This causes by a person the avodah b'chol meidacha to deal with the challenges and break the barriers every day, every year. All of our history, we break she'er. She'er means the guf, and levavi means the neshama. Tzur, levavi v'chelki, and then we reveal how the Eibishter is the tzur, is the rock of our heart, and he's our portion, and likim la'elam, God as he is la'elam. And he translates she'er zehaguf. She'er means the body, levavi means the nefesh, and she'eri ulevav, which means guf and the nefesh by a person, is based on the kol, and it translates in Yiddish As a gay, you know, in a ois glust, they go out in a great thirst. Glust actually means lust, desire for godliness. When an ois gang lavaya, an expiration for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which doesn't describe giving yourself away and disappearing like expiration, expiring, but fakert, desire. But then he adds, calls also Melashon Taino, you have a great thirst one with the Eibishter, which I guess you call a rotzen or a merutza. And you also have great delight in the Eibishter. So kala is basically Ratzon and Einig. I suppose quite often we associate kala with kaleis nefesh, which means you're losing yourself in godliness. You're being destroyed in your relationship with godliness. But here you're being included in godliness with a great desire and a great pleasure, which I guess is quite connected, even though it's arguably different. Why does the person have this preparedness? To have Mesidas Nefesh and Madrega, Bechal Meidach, until his Gufen and his Shama is in a state of Kiloyim, Leishatzur, Levavi, the Abish, there's the rock of my heart, Bechalkim, my portion of Lekim. Vos is sein Herz, what is the heart? What is the center? What is the pnimis of the person? Vos is the Starkheit von sein Heart? What's the hardness of one's heart, the strength of one's heart, which is called Tzur? Vos is ein Chelik Be'elam, what's his portion of the world? So you have three words, right? You have Levavi, which means heart. Tzur Levavi means the hardness of the heart. And Chelik means my portion of the world. And the answer is Elikim. Tzur Levavi V'chalki is Elikim. Because a Yid has a singular notion of there's whole Yetzias for Elikim, for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he serves Hashem on a level of Ava, Bechal Avavecha, Bechal Navshecha, Bechal Meidecha. So he has a Kiloy and he gives himself away completely to the Eibishter. And this notion of this Mesidas Nefesh making a Jew one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Le'elam. Le'elam means forever. Translates the Rabbi where there's no change. Because in time there's change. And only in Madrigas of above time there's no change. The Tzemach explains in his Yol my mother. That kol shel levavi is a veid the beginning of chidish of nefesh. It's a madrega of bechol meidach, it's a madrega of kaleis and nefesh madrega of yechida, which is the after the shem lekach bechol levavi bechol nafsh bechol meidach, which our Mamer is about. In as much as our Mamer is talking about the avodah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because dafka kshesh ha'inyan the bechol meidach when a yid serves Hashem and a madrega bechol meidach, he's called eisem etzein shamakam. What the Mitzrayim Maggid says, you're not doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're creating the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the Madrega, Hashem gives you mitzvahs and you do them. In the Madrega, every time you do a mitzvah, you're creating a new ratzon. Even though what the ratzon is about, tefillin, mezuzah is the same, but the ratzon is a hischachus kodaveda b'chol meidacha. That's what Chassidus explains. Eitzim etena shamakam, and of course the Rebbe has been signed to the Mitzrayim Maggid. And when you serve Hashem with such a degree of Mesidas Nefesh and bittul and kiloyin, you come to see in the creation, the creator. In the world, you see the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu which creates it. What is to see? And of course this is going to happen to us at love. The words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Machaim create, give life and substance, or subsistence, continued existence. Even now, to call Ian Shabbat to everything in the world. Like the Baal Shem Tov says in the Pasuk, that the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are recreating the creation each instant. And also love is going to be begolui, and the same is also true that this gil is not going to happen now. It's going to happen last love. To see the BiRuchniyus of Elokus in this world is possible even now. But to see the Gashmi, the Elokus of Gashmi is not going to be till Yossi Lavi, Vadayin Tzarech Bir, Vadayin Tzarech Yin. But this is the result of the Yetzias Mitzrayim and Madrega B'chol Meidecha, which causes the Kala She'edi Levavi until the Kim becomes mine Li'el. And of course, the Rebbe connects it to the Avodah that brings about the Kiloin. What is the cause of the Kala She'edi Levavi? The pasuk before, and it's interesting how the Rebbe presents it. First, he brings the second pasuk, Kala She'edi Levavi, which is Kapitel Ayin Gimel pasuk Chavav, and then he goes back and he brings the pasuk before it, which is Kapitel Ayin Gimel, pasuk Chav Hey. In Sheresh Mitzat Tefillah about davening, he brings the word from Alten Rebbe and Ian from Avodim Chalei Chafatzti. You're loving Hashem and Madrega, where you have no interest in anything besides for Hashem Himself, not even an interest in Hashem's Elokus. And the pasuk mili b'shmayim v'chafasi b'aretz is akdama to the pasuk Chashal Levavi v'Gamer, but the pasuk Chol Levavi describes the result of the avodah b'chol meidecha. So first the Rebbe says the result, and now he says the avodah again. In other words, the avodah of Yetzias Mitzrayim, BiRuchniyus, which is what our Mamer is about, is the avodah of mili b'shamayim v'imchal chafasti b'aretz. Shemei v'yalzeh, that through this avodah is echet echol yishayri. But the avodah of mili b'shamayim, Tzemach Tzaddik brings in a different signal. Our Mamer is speaking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's articulating it using the model of Ahava b'chol meidecha, and now he uses the avodah of the Alter Rebbe. Shekach hayanish mahaloshen mimirein uverabein and nishmas yedin bidvikus. This is what we used here by Malton Rebbe and Trying used to say. Ich will ze garnist. Ich will dan gan Eden. Ich will na den elma bavachulu. Ich will mer nit as dich alek. The Alter Rebbe would say, I don't want anything. I don't want your Gan Eden. I don't want your elma ba. I want nothing other than you and you alone. You should know that from the Rebbe Marash there's a sikha. From Tafresh Lamed Hey, I think it is, when the Rebbe Rashab got married in Elul. So the Rebbe Marash traveled part of the way, and in one of the train stations he spoke a sikha, and there's a hanoch of the sikha as he said it. And he said, Ichal alles avegem, Ichal afila geben dem keshem mit den Taten, Ichal men nicht avegem, verbunden mit Atmos Mus. It's very strong, Yossi. The same idea that the Alter Rebbe is saying here, that, you know, the Rebbe said once about the Alter Rebbe, Gewussten is given at Atzilus. Und not gewusst is given, Elomeitzein Seif Shalamalim, Matthias Alter Rebbe knew because he was Atzilus. He knew because he was the Edin Seif Shalamalim Atzilus, and nothing could impress him. I want Hashem. I want the absolute truth, where there's no reciprocity. You know, Anon Nesiv Malka, I'm not getting anything back, not even light of godliness, just a connection to the truth. Now what the Rebbe is going to do, he's going to divide this up into four. There's Gan Eden and Dain Gan Eden, and there's Elam Habo and Dain Elam Habo. And we know that Rebbe's words are very precise. Kol milav every single word and every single letter. Particularly when it was copied. Especially when he said it and it was recorded from a dveikus. And of course, what the Rebbe means shematikim is that the Maitik was himself a Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzaddik. So he moved in Masham B'dayik. Dein Gan Eden, Dein Elma. What would have been wrong if he said, Ich will nicht Gan Eden, Ich will nicht Elma Bo? Why did he say, your Gan Eden and your Elma Bo? Ma'i hakavona behei safas teves Dein. What is the Rebbe saying? Yours. Now the Rebbe is simply going to say that Gan Eden is a great thing and Dein Gan Eden is even greater. Elam Haba is a great thing and Dein Elam Haba is even greater. But how? He doesn't spell out. He explains. First of all, Mitzad, Gan Eden Atzmei, Eshpatan and Gotzim. The Gan Eden myself is an extraordinary thing. And he brings the much from the Baal Shem Tov on the Pasuk. That is, there's marshal of a person who goes into a palace and he gets distracted. If the person is sophisticated and cultured, he's distracted. He sees the art, he sees the music, he sees the furniture, he gets distracted and he fails to go into the king. You can get immersed. And expire in the secondary delights of those rooms. You don't get to the king altogether, which is Melech Macham Lacham HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore there's a Ma'alat Tefillah Ani. He's not sophisticated, he's not cultured. So none of these things distract him, and therefore Tefillah Nechiyat, that the Ani, a Mashiach is called Ani, for this reason is not distracted by anything. He goes straight into the Melech. That's the prayer of the Ani, that he should not be distracted by anything. And it's only Lefnei Adeshem Yishpech Siche, he should spell out for the Eibishter himself. Now, this Teirus Baal Shem Tov is the Baal Shem Tov's version of the Alter Rebbe's Teira, Mili Bashamayim Imchalei Chafatzti Ba'aretz. So, it's explaining how the person is not distracted by the Giloyim, and the Giloyim would be Gan Eden and Elam Haba. And you go into the king himself, which is the mile of the Yoni. Like you have it in the Maimorim, there's Tefillah David, there's Tefillah Chabakuk, there's Tefillah Moshe, there's Tefillah the Yoni. And it doesn't say, Tefillah only goes to Mashiach. Because the Mashiach is richer than anybody else, but he's not mispal from his wealth. He wants only Atzmus. Which is called Gan Eden. And I feel dying Gan Eden. In other words, even the way Gan Eden commission Nikabeshu Shalcha, even as you see Gan Eden, that's the Eibishter. So there's two Madrigas. Number one, Gan Eden, which the Rebbe called on the top of the page Taina Gotzum, and then when in Gan Eden, you know there's the Eibishter. Then he continues and he says, which is Nailam Gan Eden, even Elam Haba, which is really in this world, which is in Tches HaMesim. Elam Atchid also doesn't want. Even as he says, Eibishter, none of these four things bother him. So this distracted. So the Teres Abba Shem Tev really is an alternative version of the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, and in both of them the key is you're not nispol, not from Gan Eden, and not from Dain Gan Eden, not from Elam Haba, not from Dain Elam Haba. What is the difference between Gan Eden and Dain Gan Eden? He doesn't say, and he says that you can see that it's the Eibishter. Of course, Gan Eden. What is Gan Eden? Gan Eden is a Tainig of Elakus, so it's always Dain. So what's the nuance of Dain Gan Eden? He doesn't explain. And the same is true Elam Haba, Elam Atchiyah, that everything in the world is one with Elakus, and then Gain Elam Haba is even higher. So the Rebbe doesn't explain to us what. He simply points out that these are four different steps. Okay? Ich will mir nicht as dich allein. The person says that I'm not distracted, not by Gan Eden, not by Dain Gan Eden, not by Elam Haba, not by Dain Elam Haba, as dich allein. Umeisif bazeh tevas allein. Hashem is alone, like you say in davening, Simlich levadecho. The Eibush as he is alone, by himself. In a way of Eined Mevada, besides for the Eibush there is nothing. So this is the end game of this Ovid. This is Aveda Bechol Meidecha. This is the Yetzias Mitzrayim that our Mamer is about, which brings it to the Mamer, the Matzav of Kol Shei Levavi, which the Rebbe spoke about earlier in the Mamer, which is later in the Pedic. And this kash you have, of course, in the Mamer of Atat Tzava also. Who are we? Mi who? That we should have any shaykhs the madrig of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe said Dich Alein. And there's places where the Rebbe explains that the Alter Rebbe saying Dich Alein is mamish, the idea that says in Zayar. Mashiach also Vasavat Tzadikaya B'tiyufta, that's the madrig of Tzadikim doing tshuva. What does that have to do with us? Nevertheless, since it was not just a secret given over me Pella Ezef from Rebbe to Rebbe, but it was revealed to Chassidus. It was revealed to the people of the whole world, and it was published in a sefer that Tfusas L'Dedos, that the Rebbe always says. Movem is that the fact that Bash Gachal Yenu, we know about it, is itself the proof. Sheshemet Minei, what trace of this? Shayech Laved is Golachad V'Yisrael, is connected to the Veda of every single Jew. The Bechal also, and what is this Aveda von Dich Alein? Abashas a Yid zog Shema Yisrael Adino Yelhenu Adonai Echad. When a Yid says Shema Yisrael, and the Inyan of Shema Yisrael Shumei said Naf Shebekeach, he potentially gives away he's prepared to give away his life to the Eibishter. Vertes Farachen, that's considered as if as Aveda Bechol Meidecha, as if he's actually giving himself away to the Eibishter, the Madreg of Bechol Meidecha, to the Madreg of Imchalecha Fatzti. So we sit in shul in a safe place and we close our eyes and we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, and mechaven the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh, of giving ourselves away to HaKadosh Baruch Hu completely, B'chol Meidecha. So this is considered the highest madrega of tshuva, the highest madrega of Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so you're breaking your limitations in yourself. Right? So first you do it in your kavanah, in your meditation, and in your davening, and then it translates into your behavior. When you give to tzedakah, there's no limits. We learn Torah, there's no limits. Davening, there's no limits. And of course, all of these things are work. The Rebbe is not describing a walk in a park. He's not describing some kind of a philosophical notion. He's not talking about Hashem redeeming us. He's talking about us redeeming ourselves through an avodah of Mesiras Nefesh to break barriers. It breaks the barriers of the world at large. That the Eibishter gives a Yid, and it translates into Gashmi. See how the Rebbe spins. First, you're giving yourself away, which is in effect a Ratzu. But then there's the Shei. Because Hashem gives that person from his full and open and holy and broad hand. Any measure or any limitation in the world Like the Alter Rebbe said in Hayem Yem, as der Eibish get Yidden Gashmis. Hashem gives Jewish people material things, und Yidden machen von die Gashmis Ruchnis, and Jewish people make from this materialism spirituality. And the Rebbe continues. Now that we spent 2 paragraphs, 112 and 113, connecting the Avodah, which this Mamer is about, which is the union of Yetzias Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus, he concludes. This explains that Yetzias Mitzrayim didn't happen once upon a time, but it happens every year in Pesach in a big way, and it happens also, it's supposed to happen in a big way also every day. The Kedim Krish before one says Shema Hunim Tzadayin b'Mitzrayim Agvul is measured limited even though it's of Kedusha. Because Av Shekvar Omer Kol HaTfilah he's davened until Krishma. V'gam Berches Krishma Shalifni there's even said the Bracha before Krishma which are about the Kechav Mazalis and the Malachim and the Sfiris and the Neshamas Yisrael. Still the person's level is before. The madreg of Eis and Mitzvah Neshamakam, the madreg where his avodah is in such a level of Mesiras Nefesh, and when he does the mitzvah, he's creating by the Eibishter Nuras. In other words, the Fnai India Mesiras Nefesh Bepeil Al Kolponim is before actual Mesiras Nefesh. Now observe that in the previous paragraph, when he mentioned Shema Yisrael, he called it Mesiras Nefesh Bekoyach. Now he calls it Mesiras Nefesh Bepeil, which is interesting. The person then follows up all of the avodah that he did before davening in the beginning of davening, and says Krishma. The pasuk is tzarich kavana like Allah. This pasuk requires a kavana. It brings forward the kavana of all of Krishma. Says the hey look at Rebbe hini oz who yetsim yamitzar one goes out of his own narrowness and own limitations. Aidesha Mason, Nafshila, Vayil, Hirosil Mitzvahs of his Mason, Nefesh to the Eibishter and his Tayid and his mitzvahs. And as a result of this, he's free from limitations. And he adds noch a insight. That even in Golus, although he's sleeping on the conscious levels of Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, he's sleeping, his eyes are closed, his other chushim are compromised. But Velibiyad, the Pintaliyad, is wide awake. That even Kasher and Yeshena Begalusa, like it says in Zayir, the heart which goes on the Yechid is awake. And of course, this is very connected to the Maimarim of Purim. Balaylahu, not the Shnas HaMelech Malka Shalelim. Ani Yeshena Begalusa, Velibiyad are the same notion that even in Ghost, when you're sleeping, the Yechid is revealed and it's more powerful even than in Zman HaBayis. And the way of Libi and become Libi like Kadosh Baruch Hu L'Teiros Mitzvah, which is Lashon from the Medrash and the Maimorah. Who the way the heart is awake, even though the conscious person is sleeping, is an Eif and and even though it's Rak Me'ed Shel Chol, like it says in the Maimorah, it's not truly infinite; it's a person's personal infinity, but still you say. By this person, it's his ma'ed. For him personally, it's higher than B'didav Akbala. It breaks the barriers of Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus. And Ayedeizim is battle Gama Mitzrayim Deli that breaks the Mitzrayim of Klipa. Achin is battle Gama Mitzrayim Kipshuta until you break the Mitzrayim physically, which is Yetzim Yagols. Now you see here, there's an interesting spin. Because the way the Maimah begins is that Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Gashmi has happened first. What happened a long time ago. But now you have Yetzias Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus every year Pesach and every day based on the Alter Rebbe and Tanya. But what's going to be the end? That the Golus is going to end. And the Golus' ending has an advantage over the Yetzias Mitzrayim BiRuchniyus because it happens in the physical world, which is consistent with what Chassidus explains Tefillah. Right? I'm sure you know the Bevushta Shaila, the well-known question that davening is a ladder. Till Baruch Shomer is Asiyah, till after Yishtabach is Yetzirah, Berches Krishma, Krishma is Bria, and Atzilus is Shmenesra. And Daf Kishmenesra, you're asking for food. Baruch Aleinu, you're asking for health, Refueinu. It doesn't make any sense, it's counterintuitive. So this is of course from Kabbalah, but it's explained in Chassidus, that it's not the pshat, you're getting physical bounty, but that you're seeing the revelation of Hashem even physically. In other words, the reason the highest madrege of connection to Hashem shows itself in physical brachas because it means that you're so deeply connected that the connection shows itself on the physical level. It's similar to what he said in the end of the previous paragraph about the Eibush giving a Yid Gashmias. So the ultimate Yetzias Mitzrayim is when it happens physically. That means that the Gili Alakus is not only on Ruchniyus levels, it's even on a Gashmi level, which is the culmination of all the Ruchniyus Mitzrayim that came first. So the Gashmi Yetzias Mitzrayim is not something separate or something physical only vis-a-vis the Ruchniyus Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's actually the culmination of all the Ruchniyus Yetzias. And he finishes the Mamer. So far we talked about what? The Yetzias Mitzrayim the first time, Yetzias Mitzrayim once a year, Yetzias Mitzrayim every day. The question that he asked on page 110 is still outstanding. Why would you mention Yetzias Mitzrayim after Mashiach comes? And he finishes, okay, at the days we left Mitzrayim, and Hashem showed us wonders, and Mashiach is going to come, is going to show us bigger wonders, and still we're going to make reference back to Yetzias Mitzrayim. He says, number one, you made Yetzias Lashon Rabbi. We're going out of Mitzrayim every day till Mashiach comes. Every day from Tezvav Nisan. From the first event of Exodus, on the 15th of Nisan of the year 2448. From that point forward, there's a continuation of going out of limitations every single day, spiritually and even physically. The work of going out of measure and limitation. Each one in our own level. And of course the end of this is going to be Mashiach al Yad and Yereche. So he says, maybe it brings about the Zagula, that you go out of limitations completely. And first of all, it's the Gula Pratis, the personal going out of limitations. Of Kol Echad ve'echad of each individual, Meha Medides ve'Agbala, his own measures, own limitations. As we discussed, that the way you see the person's going out of his limitations is not just that Hashem gives you a lot of money and a lot of health and a lot of Eiches Yamim, but that you give tzedakah l'mam didav agbala. The tzedakah includes all mitzvahs, which is gemilas chasadim, and then you daven l'mam didav agbala. That agam shabo, you may love people come to Matri, they may say, and they exhaust you. Because you're a business person and you're involved in business, so people want you to continue paying attention to the markets. If you're a public servant, to be involved in askanas. No matter what it is, the person therefore feels he may not have time to daven with a minyan, or the Rebbe expresses itself that doesn't reckon with this at all. His serving Hashem and davening is in other words, he figures out how to daven maximally in spite of the distractions. I'm reminded of the Ma'aseh with the Razor, which is l'chayda what the Rebbe is alluding to. The Razor was a businessman, but he got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and he davened. He made a chodesh to daven until 9 o'clock. Then he went to sleep. He went to sleep when the stock market opened, and he slept till noon. So if you came to him in the morning and said, I have an opportunity to make an investment, they would tell him, I schlaft. If he was middle of davening, they would disturb him. He would sleep the first few hours of the day. His mindset was, the Avodas Atfil is more important than this. And he would get up whenever he got up, and then he would start dealing with the markets. It's a priority. And the Yetzias Mitzrayim is that we have the right priorities. And al derech zeh be'esek ha'teira, the special time shows this Teira, that kvi is eating the Ruchal Yeviyim, he learns that every day. Shabbos and Yom Tiv, he makes no considerations disturb this priority. That's a siman that he's not in limitations. And the Rebbe says, so Mashiach is going to come, and there's going to be greater miracles and greater neflos than ever, greater than Yetzias Mitzrayim. What there's not going to be is Allah Mizveh. What there's not going to be is the fighting against and overcoming the Allah Mizveh. So the Rebbe says, this is the answer to the question on the second page of the Mamer. The Eibishter gets a special nachas ruach, not from how much we achieve, but how much we fight against obstacles. Is gafye, like it says in Tanya Perikov Zayin from the Zayah, that it's hard in the sapche in terms of the nachas ruach that Hashem gets. In a time when you can touch darkness. Or the mitzvah, the person is pale biyatzme, the person affecting his own person. Lot says me amid sadim v'agabalas b'nitzachin atzum to go out of the measures and limitations with incredible stubbornness, incredible victory. And he learns Teda, and he davens and he gives stuck in those mitzvahs with an ace, with a priority in spite of the distractions of Elam Hazeh. This wonder of Yetzias Mitzrayim is niskeres v'nasa b'chal yom. It's remembered and happens every day. But moreover, he niskeres afil b'meisa Mashiach. Mashiach is going to come, and Mashiach is going to bring about great revelations. We're never going to stop talking about the idea that we went out of Mitzrayim, even when we had a Yetzias Hada, even when it was a Barach because the mile of his kafya. This is explained in so many places, including Tanya Perek Mamalef, Lamed Aleph, the mile of Barach Ha'am. Mashiach is Kidu as Gedel Law. Even after Mashiach comes in the greater revelations, then we're going to continue to remember the great wonder of this kafya, of the bending and transforming self against the odds, against the klipa. Goes that happened during Galus, because Dafke Bazebi is kafya, and this is kafya. Although his kafya is made there is hapcha. Like it says in Basi Legani, there's a yes in this kafya, over there is hapcha. There's tainig miyucha, there's a special delight. In this kafya, she'enei gam b'aveda, this hapcha, which doesn't even exist in the greater and higher avodah, is hapcha. And idea Yaveh this kafya sitirach through bending klipa. Is taleki kara the kucho b'nicha kula alma the glory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to all the worlds. Particularly Mazagashmi. Why particularly Mazagashmi? Because you did the time, you did the crime, you get the time. You did the avodah, you get the schar. Because Bei lame them teira. Bei mekaya mitzvahs. Ubei eisim etzein ishal mokum in the aveda b'chol meidechal. So therefore the schar is going to be here. Like it says in Chassidus, that's why Tchias HaMeisim is the Tachas HaAcharein. Because the Tachas Achran has to be with the Neshama and Guf, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin. The Neshama and the Guf did the avodah, the Neshama and the Guf get the schar. V'zeh mekarev, and the avodah of kafya itself hastens. The kates on the chesed. There should be no more klipa and no more need for his kafya. What did it be bagol? You're done quickly. Shetiagul, Hamid Hashem, the Sheikh said, Cain. V'yid, Obey Nebas says, Kiyama, you will see physically the fulfillment of the prophecy, Kiyama takes come to Simon and it flies. So, I'm walking away from this Mamer. It took me an hour and a half to teach it, let's say. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, I don't know. And my big feeling is, where's the difficulty? The Mamer is gegangen geschmiert. It was an easy Mamer. Did I miss something? Probably. It's the classic Yetzias Mitzrayim Mamer. And the idea that Yetzias Mitzrayim is an inyan ruchni. There's no doubt about it. And he links it to the Perek. But, when you see the next Mamer, you can almost define this Mamer as segueing to the next Mamer. Because the next Maimon is going to say that everything we say about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're going to say about Kriyas Yamsuf on a higher level. Because Yetzias Mitzrayim prepares the Keli, prepares the world, and Kriyas Yamsuf prepares the Neshamas Yisrael, Ukafishi is by the Kamen and Mitzvah Hashem. A gute Nacht.